Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Astral Radiance, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking over the Milwaukee Regional results. It was a almost 700 player tournament with Astral Radiance legal the first time in North America, and it's just less than a week before, actually, NAIC, which is one of the largest and most important tournaments of the year, just behind Worlds, and it's one of the last occasions we have to play Pokemon before Worlds altogether, and it wraps a bit of a bow on Astral Radiance. It's a really close-knit time period where we have this Sword and Shield to Astral Radiance meta. We don't yet know about rotation, of course, but at least Pokemon Go will be introduced for Worlds. We know that much, and we know now that Lost Order won't be released in time. So pretty important to get a grip of the metagame if you are attending NAIC, because that's obviously one of the biggest tournaments of the year. Saw some interesting stuff. The top 8 was a lot more diverse than the previous regional over in Australia, where it was a Palkia Fiesta. Still a good amount of Palkia in the top 8, of course, most of them being the Inteleon build, outshining the Turbo list that really was making its stake and its claim in the format in Australia, but it seemed like Inteleon came out on top in this instance. Still a Mew riding high. Arcdura and Blissey, two pretty well-respected decks, did make first and second, but I think it's fair to say these sort of spiked the tournament. This is a very high placement for these sorts of archetypes, which aren't really they're sort of within the top 5 decks, I guess, in the game, in terms of like online placements and whatnot, but this really is a great showing for those sorts of archetypes, and another Arcdura in top 8, so a very, very big tournament for that sort of deck. We don't have all 8 of the list, unfortunately, but we have a good amount of diversity and at least one deck for each archetype to look at today. Before we jump into the list, let's have a quick look at the breakdown from Pokestats. We don't yet have the full standings, unfortunately. There are still some blanks here, but there was a good amount of Arc Flying Pika as a sort of non-Inteleon engine, just playing Bibarel, Crobat, and Pika. So that's similar to the Arcbat list that we saw previously, but Pikachu being the new include to be good into Regis and good into Palkia, at least hitting for weakness, and somewhat okay against Bliss Tank. Arc Pika is still lacking its own attackers into Miltank, but you can do some funky deck out strats, so something to bear in mind there. There were some Stone Joiner stalling decks. Reggie made it as high as top 16, but was pretty popular and I think by most accounts underperformed from people's expectations. That could have been down to Arcdura in part and a few other choices here and there. There were also some Galarian birds, like dark intel boxes, but not a huge amount of them making that second day of the tournament. So just a lot of Arc, a lot of Palkia, and a lot of Mew. So those still seem to be the sort of front runners in the room, with a handful of other things to keep in mind. But let's jump over to the deck list, starting with Arcdura, which did populate the top 8 and win the tournament as well. It's a pretty cookie-cutter list with only a couple like key decisions here. And I think Eldegoss is the one that stands out like a sore thumb. This is really an interesting one because you're only playing 6 good basics and really only 4 good basics. It's still awkward for you to lead Duraludon. And Eldegoss being that 7th card gives you, I think it's about a 10% or so to lead this guy as the only basic in your opening hand, which is a little bit rough, especially for a deck that wants to force the most awkward prize map in the game. Maybe Bliss Tank is on par with that, actually. But yeah, the Eldegoss gives people easier prizes, which is no good thing. But I think what the Eldegoss is representing is respect for Roxanne and how important it is for Duraludon to not miss a beat in those later stages of the game, where you oftentimes need the likes of Boss's Orders to close out an opponent. So giving yourself 4 Ultra 4 Quick Ball, gear out the highest count of boss possible, and Eldegoss is a great way to respect Roxanne and give yourself a decent chance of still hitting supporter cards off those final couple turns. So yeah, it's an interesting tweak on the deck. I don't know if it's one that everyone's going to jump on board with, because there is that fear factor of leading it in a good number of games. But as long as you don't, it does give you a lot of security and makes your deck a lot more robust in those later stages, which is cool. Hyper Potion, I think it's just something that's here to stay. It's one of the main ways that you perform well into Palkia. Interestingly, there are no Avery in this list whatsoever, and only 2 Hyper Potion. I think a lot of the Arcdura lists I'm seeing are playing a number of Avery as well as Hyper Pots, sometimes even higher counts of healing. So I think you have a more stable Palkia matchup if you are playing those sorts of tech cards. So just a small thing to bear in mind there. But overall, not a bad list. It's fairly cookie cutter, just a couple key decisions here, like the Avery is not often played, and the Birdkeeper sometimes can be an Avery, sometimes chopping up some of these counts into other supporters. But overall, the shell of Arcdura is still very much here, and did very well for Braden. Then we have Connor, Cube Extraordinaire, and also pretty good in Standard by the looks of things. He is playing Blissey Miltank, and again, some really key decisions that I think he got very right for this tournament helped him out-progress like a lot of the other Blissies and really go far into this tournament. And if you didn't watch the final, it's one of the better finals we've had this year, I think, actually. We've not been too blessed with good finals on stream, but this was one of the strongest ones with a lot of interesting lines and a back and forth, obviously based around the stadium more for the most part, but there was a lot of intricate math going on for both players, so really one that I encourage you guys watching. And I think Connor's performance, we got to see him a couple times, and I think really puts this deck more on the map and shows it off to be a thinking man's deck, not just going to be, Miltank won me the game. Of course, that's going to be like a primary win condition. If Blissey is able to blast its way through your opponent's answers to Miltank, you do have a clear runway for the guy sometimes. But oftentimes it comes down to Miltank being a secondary thing that the opponent has to consider, whilst Blissey's front and center, just slapping its way through people by being a really chunky guy. It does a very similar thing to Arcdura, where it has a very limited bench against Palkia. You have the full 4 Hyper Potion being supported here, and 3 Averys. So like I was saying, Avery is oftentimes in the Arcdura. Blissey does the exact same strategy here with the caped up Bliss, hyper potting away using Sharons and Averys, as well as Yell Towels and Switch Carts, so really, really high on the healing here to just keep Bliss out of range and keep slapping on through Palkias, which is really awesome and is certainly an effective strategy, I think. We can see, the top 2 decks both employ this low bench, lots of heal strat, and it's really annoying for Palkia in particular. And it's also annoying for, like, Arceus as well. Its damage output isn't necessarily that high, so the Hyperpots are very good in those sorts of instances. Can also be helpful into Mew, especially because you have Path. You can sort of limit their options in certain instances, so you can out-heal when they're not popping off with, full tablet turns and whatnot. So that's also pretty cool. Really like the Tornadus tech card. It has that sudden Cyclone that just pushes the opponent's active out of the way like a repel effect. Or half of an escape rope. I think the reason why you see Tornadus rather than a rope is it has quick ball search ability, so you can have it more live in the instances when you need to play the card, and you also have Scoop Up Net, so you can potentially do this twice. Scoop Up Net is a really nice card in general in this deck because you can do some funky prize mapping where you can remove potential prizes they had in mind when you try and consider your 1 prize guys, which is cool. It means you can get the Miltank involved, even if you start a Greninja early to draw you some cards, then you net up the Greninja and remove that out from the opponent, which is cool. Lets you just pick up and put down a Greninja just for extra draws for early Blissful Blast activations, which is great. And it really lets you use Tornado. So I think all round it's very, very strong. I'm actually up to 2 copies in my current list. I think Net is a great include here. Otherwise, pretty straightforward, to be honest. We've seen the Yveltal, the Greninja, both be great includes from Astral. Dunsparce is in here respecting Reggie's more often than not, I think. I'm still sort of soft on the Dunsparce, personally. I think it's a space, especially because Reggie didn't perform all that well this tournament. I think it's potential cut if you want to make room. I actually played this for a couple hours just yesterday, and there was a reasonable debate around Zinnia's Resolve and Milo. Sounds like an absolute meme, but if there's more Mirror, more Arcdura, there's actual reasons for people to be playing Milo rather than Zinnia's. Obviously, the sort of top 2 decks in the game, being Mew and Palkia, are sort of go-wide decks, so Zinnia's does get more cards than Milo in those instances. And I guess, specifically against Mew, it's so important for you to not miss Path that the additional draws are a big deal. But just a small consideration there. Like, you like having Zinnia or Milo just for discard synergy of your energy cards, just like why you like having a high research count. But it's actually kind of close between the 2 cards. I don't think it's that much of a meme to play Milo. And one final note on this deck, if you want to have a better time against Arc Pikachu, you can put in Shauna into your deck to help you deck out the opponent. Also, a second Sharon's Care is an option because you can load up Blissies, then tank and Sharon's to put naturally a ton of cards back into your hand that then can get Marnied back into your deck, so you can end up having more than the opponent. So some intricacies there against Arc Pikachu, because it oftentimes does come down to a stalemate of Blissey and Miltank tanking and Pika just sat there announcing its attack each turn. So just a few notes there. But I think this is a really solid deck, and the way Connor built it really did help with some of the weaknesses of the list and showed it to be very powerful. And obviously he made space by cutting Crushing Hammer, which was in like most online 60s, but proving that it may not be mandatory. Chris ended up getting top 4 with Mew, and he was playing the straightforward high boss, no catcher build. I think most people were expecting catchers going into this tournament because there was talk of Diancie and stuff like that people would sit behind, but it really doesn't seem to be as good as just drawing cards and having 3 Shoe, 3 Phone, 3 Cram. Interesting counts. Kind of couldn't choose which one was best in which situation, so just had a high count of all of them. And it's just going for the Rose Towers here. Just 3 copies makes me a little bit nervous because I feel like Roxanne Path is a strat that Arceus and Palkia will employ against you. So that makes me a little bit worried. Also, not having Silene or Echoing Horn also makes me very worried. So this is just like a let's just draw good kind of Mew and hope that just drawing more gooder than my opponent wins me more games than having like more resources, more fuel and more tricks up my sleeve. So it's a pretty straightforward list that just draws better than other people. So it's something we haven't seen much of Mew doing recently. It's sort of like crammed in the Horn that comes off 1 in 5 games. It's crammed in the Silene that on heads flips can completely, reverse an awkward position where it gets you that extra tablet or gets you that second Mew if one's prized and stuff. So rather than having wiggle room, he's just sort of gone for, let me just out-tempo my opponent to win that way, which is very fair. Don't really know Franco's list. I know a couple of things. I think he did play Sharon. I think he played Rare Candy as well, and possibly even Capture Energy, because I think that's how a lot of the Japanese lists have played it. And I know Franco is in touch with the Japanese meta and some of the players there as well. So no confirmation on his list, just a few things on the grapevine that I've heard about his 60. So it's, again, different to Todd's, Justin's... Todd's and Riley's as well. So just a small thing there. Let's have a look at Justin's Arceus build, though. And I think Arceus is still decent enough to compete, as we've seen. It's still very consistent, draws good, and has the tools. I think double Big Charm is pretty safely the right call now, just to try and tank Palk hits when you can. If you're playing a little bit crafty with your board, you can have the double Sharons, the double Big Charm at your disposal. You can still tutor with your intels, and you can try and deny prizes that way against a Palkia. Also playing that Collapse Stadium to do a very similar thing here. It's a potential healing card, it's a potential reduction for Palk's damage, which I think is strong. And other than that, it's just very straightforward, very consistent. The double path with double Marnie and Roxanne gives you an early game threat against Mew and a late game attempt as well, which I think is good. So I think Arc is good enough to have games into both of these decks. It's not playing Belt or Zig, maybe 2 combo orientated, just playing 1 boss, and the Pal Pad is kind of interesting. So you have to play a little bit carefully in these instances, but I feel like the deck can definitely tangle with the top stuff still, and this is a very consistent list that we see here. So very solid overall. Let's have a look at Tord 60, one that I'm sure most people dived straight towards because it's one of the best players in the world, if not the best, playing probably the best deck in the game. So a lot of people go straight down to Tord and just want to have a look at his 60. Tord's made the statement, and it's a statement that I'm so happy to see. Irida is a good card. What a great, crazy statement that is. Playing the 1 VIP quad Irida, as opposed to a lot of the American top contingent of players that were playing full VIP and no Irida, or like a low Irida count, I think it was. And I think Riley also doesn't play any Irida, so pretty interesting that most Palkias have come to separate conclusions. I wasn't quite on the full 4 Irida, I was on 3 and 2 VIP, so I'm somewhere in the middle, but I definitely rate this card, and I think it's really, really strong for just treatering most things. The other thing that kind of made my eyes bulge a little bit is he's up to 4 buckets. That's such a statement that bucket is cracked. because all you want to do is be turn attaching, concealing cards, and rinse and repeat that, basically. So the full 4 buckets, even with 4 Irida, sounds crazy to me. I've had a few games with this list, and I do feel like buckets like such a great card to see in your opening that you sort of take it with a pinch of salt when you start seeing it in that mid to late game, and you may not even have enough water in the deck, and it's just like a burnable card that you just thin straight away. So again, I'm sort of on that 3 kind of bucket personally, but I do see its power. It's such a strong card, to be fair. Outside of that, he's playing the very straightforward Pokemon line, is backing the Laminion as an option to tutor out the right supporters at the right moments. He's playing Cheryl, which is kind of spicy. Works nicely with the Tool Jammer. Is playing Palpad as well for potential double dip, so can try and do that Healy shenanigan thing against an Arceus player as well, which is cool, or at least put them in that situation. Like if you're retreating and Cheryling and attacking with another Palkia, obviously you can do a Cheryl Star Portal thing, but you can only do that once. So if you are Palpadding a Cheryl and like retreating into another Palk and doing hits like that, you can try and put them in a spot where they can't boss and Sharons at the same time. That old chestnut. So yeah, it gives you a decent time into Healy Arc builds, which I think is kind of cool. Also has the Starmie, which is obviously very good against Arceus in general, stops them or makes them think about going greedy on energy cards, that sort of thing. Outside of that, not too much to be said, really. Is playing Hisuian, which isn't always in the list, but I think is pretty strong. Is playing the Nessa for Pokemon Recovery, which is kind of nice. Definitely strong against Avery. Gives you some pretty cool reload situations as well. And it can also play around Echoing Horn against Mew, which is a small thing there as well. So, pretty strong list. I feel like a lot of people will be taking this and running with it because it's Tord. So, yeah. But for me, even though you see the 4 and 4, I still kind of like 3 and 3 of both of these. I don't mind going to one boss if you play pad and play double cross switcher. I think having cross switcher in the list is like really strong still. Gives you an extra pivot in the deck, which it doesn't play any like ropes or switches. And it gives you potential Iridas into Gust, which I think is cool, because the Irida sometimes lets you go wider on the board, and it's just like more versatile than the second copy of Boss. But that's just my rant. I think this is really close to like perfect 60 already, and it's Tord, right? you know it's going to be close because he'd have put a lot of time in. Then there's Arcdura, and we finally have Riley's 60, which, like I said, is pretty different. So we can see there's multiple ways you can try and perform well with the deck, which is always a good sign for the power level in general. Riley's opting to play double belt for higher push potential, as well as Leon, so really likes getting over those other V-stars and is fully aware that the opponent's trying to play around with their bench and stuff. Isn't playing the Wrecking Horn, just playing the Leon. Has his Ordinary Rod rather than a Nessa. That's a small debate to be had there. I think it could partly be because of Crobat, and it means that you can Rod Crobat in to also play around good old Echoing Horn against Mew. So I think if you play the non-water guy, you can't really play the Nessa, which makes some sense. Playing really high ball search count, but not playing any VIP pass, just playing outs to draw cards with Crobat to then, hit the rest of the stuff, which does make a good amount of sense. There's up to 2 Temple of Sinnoh as well. Maybe just because you want to continually have Radiant Greninja at your disposal, maybe a little bit concerned that if the Sinnoh's prized, maybe you're locked out of Star Portal the entire game, or there's an outside chance that he is concerned about Reggie's. So I think that's an interesting count. The second copy is like not bad by any means, but it's not like a mandatory include. Give you some peace of mind here and there though. But it's interesting to see that Riley also plays a Palpad in his list, and is also not playing cross switcher. I do believe the sort of popular contingent of American players that did still perform well with the deck were playing cross switchers though. So just a small thing to bear in mind there. Boss wins out this time with Palpad, as we've seen do well with Arc Intel many times over. But I'm still a cross switcher stan, just letting you know. Obviously, it makes no sense in Riley's list because he's not playing Irida. But when you are playing that high count, I really do like squeezing those in. So yeah, 2 different builds to go off of. I do like double belt personally. I think that's really nice into just mirror match situations and a lot of V-Star matchups. So I do like the second copy personally. It just gives you some peace of mind. It lets you play greedier with things like Starmie as well into arcs. So it lets you do some cool other stuff. But yeah, Riley's actually playing no backup Pokemon, so it really is needing to get like double Palk down in a lot of situations, going second, and with no VIPs, that's kind of sketchy. So something to consider there, but no VIPs whatsoever in the 60, which I think is coming more and more commonplace with Palk, but maybe that's just an Irida thing. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on the deck lists. What do you think about Bliss Tank and Arcdura? Are they going to be more or less popular for NAIC? Are there going to be big waves built around what deck you're choosing to be good into these sorts of matchups? You know, are we going to see more Reggies to be good into Bliss, but bad against Arcdura unless they're playing a high count of the path? Where do you really pick your battles? Is that going to have a resurgence? Are people just going to completely forget about the turbo list of Palkia and be all Inteleon from here? And how is Arceus going to fare now that it's got its footing with the Pikachu build? Still seems to be viable with Inteleon as well. Potential actually for, believe it or not, Beedrill to come back. It's obviously really bad into Palk, but it's really good into Bliss Tank, and it's really good still into Mew, and potential Arc Mirror, which could be on the incline now that we've seen the Flying Pikachu. You know, not quite make top 8s, but it did have a lot of top 16 placements. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.